Stress to our finances has been caused or worsened by many things, whether it's to COVID and its problems, all the way to load shedding, to the increases of price in oil, to unemployment and the closures of business. The reality is that we need to, more than before, manage our funds with tomorrow in mind.
Government has also proposed a fundamental restructuring of retirement system for individuals to allow for greater preservation and partial access to funds through what they call a two-pot system. Part of this proposal includes the possibility of short-term access, which would be depend on the approval by trustees of each fund. Let me just explain this thing. No, I can't give you money from your own pension fund. Your own pension fund has got its own trustees. The decision to take money out of the fund must be a decision of a trustee. The only thing I'm going to do as the Minister of Finance is to create a conducive environment for trustees to make that decision if they think the fund is capable of doing so. But the Minister of Finance, what must copy man and who's again it? No. Think upon thing get paid. No. Your trustees must make the decision. I will make the law which make it possible for the trustees to make the decision, not me.
Good day, it's Madusum Kize. So we've heard the Minister of Finance talk about the two-pot system that he's going to introduce via legislation. But I just thought we have a look at what it could possibly look like and just make one quick comparison with a foreign country. When we use an example of the US and see how they've managed accessing funds before retirement. In reality, although the draft was set to be, or the legislation was set to come in next year, but with the whole process of drafting, comments from the public, even the actual companies, the fund administrators themselves, you would imagine there'd be a lot of admin. They'll have to change their systems and that kind of stuff. So it's probably going to happen. 2024 is the talk. But it's going to be a process. But however, the important thing is, let's have a look at how it is purported to look like. Now, in the past, government had come up with initiatives to try and alleviate the effects of COVID. The business closures and that kind of stuff that led to unemployment was drastic, obviously. So this whole two-pot system is really just riding on that wave, or was spurred on primarily by the COVID pandemic, which would just not affect us in South Africa, but worldwide. So families are clearly under pressure, all of us. So it was a way to try and say, because we are facing these financial difficulties, there are going to be hard times. And although we have these funds that are set or earmarked for purely for retirement, but the reality is that we need to survive today. What do you do with your school fees that your kids have got to eat? You've got to pay petrol, and you've seen the petrol price recently. So it's really a way of trying to alleviate the short-term stresses that every man in the street faces currently, that at least has a pension fund that they can access in order to alleviate those short-term stresses. So far, how we understand the two-pot system, how it's going to operate, is that I've just used in my example a simple figure of 300 rands. So if the contribution to that pension fund is 300 rands, this contribution gets split into two. A third of it will go into what's called an accessible pot. So that's going to be 100 rands and sitting in that pot, and then 2/3 of it is going to go into the retirement pot. Now, the important distinction is that this retirement pot is compulsory preservation. So whatever accumulates under this pot is going to be preserved up until retirement. You cannot access it. And then on this side, under the accessible pot, These funds you can access based on financial hardship. So you have to show that you are undergoing some financial hardship in order to be able to access these funds. Now, one of the things that still has to be answered is after contributing 300 rands a month for 12 months, and you're sitting with a fund value of 3,600 rands, and I'm not. I'm forgetting about fees, costs, interest, and all of that kind of stuff. I'm just using the 300 rands times 12. If legislation is passed and now we can access a portion of our fund value, we go backwards and say, since we have 3,600 rands, up to a third of it can be accessed immediately? Or do we say it is only with respect to contributions going forward? Now, that determination is quite important because you can imagine some funds, as an example, amongst other things. If you're sitting with a fund where immediately fund members can access up to a third of their fund, if it's a small fund, especially new funds that have come through, that fund might all of a sudden become unsustainable. People all of a sudden withdraw up to a third of their fund value. And secondly, you can imagine also for defined benefit funds, such as the government employee pension fund. Those are defined benefit funds. So if all of a sudden members have been contributing, they still, as a fund, stuck to providing those defined benefits at retirement. However, during the term, people are accessing their funds up to a third, so that could cause some problems there. So there's a lot of things to consider while we in preparation of this legislation to be able to have us access that accessible pot. Now, obviously, it's still early days for our legislation, as the Minister of Finance has alluded to. It's still going to be in draft, and it's going to be bills. There's still going to be public conversations about it. It's still going to be a process. But however, so in order to just to get a sense of what's happening in other jurisdictions, I thought I'll just use the case of the USA, where where individuals can access some of their funds before retirement based on hardship. Now, you might ask, so what is hardship? Because being in early days, our trustees, although the minister says he will give them the authority to make that decision, but how do we define hardship, or what are the criteria, or some sort of guidelines that trustees can use in determining that, not just for the benefit of the survival of the fund, but for criteria for the members to be able to approach the fund and say, could I apply for hardship withdrawal? Okay, so on this slide, I've just put down some criteria in terms of the 401k, which is the pension plan in the US. So, for example, individuals could apply for certain medical expenses, purchase of main residence, tuition and related expenses, payments to prevent eviction, funeral costs, repair of damage to house, and so on. You'll see that these criteria or these things are quite serious things. They're not, for borrowing funds against your pension to throw a party or something like that. So it's really things that are important, so that as individuals, as members of the fund, are able to sustain ourselves during the times of hardship. Now, with the case of the US, one would have to just show to the trustees of the fund whatever hardship they're going through, submission of documents and that kind of stuff, in order for them to be granted that hardship or that hardship withdrawal. However, it's quite important that there's other things to consider. If like as in the case in the US, if you exercise that withdrawal, there is going to be a 10% penalty depending on your age. 59 and a half, if there'll be a 10% penalty on that. That's besides the income tax that will be levied on that. So it doesn't come at a free cost. There is a cost to the client. There are other ways that it could be structured in the case of the US. For example, a person, instead of suffering both the penalty and the tax on the withdrawal, where they could rather make a loan against their pension funds and then they have to pay back with interest. That's to avoid the tax. The penalty will still apply based depending on age, is how they work it. So in terms of our legislation, we don't even know what taxes might be applicable when one applies for trying to access their pension funds. So that's still to be seen. But however, it's something that's possibly going to be, or likelihood going to be in place. I think the important thing for us to take home is that while legislation is still going to be drafted and we don't know what it's going to look like, what the penalties or taxes are going to be, the important thing to understand is we are going through tough times, and these things are going to enable us at least to cope. But however, it's up to us to be very responsible how we draw these funds and for what intended purpose. If you look at the hardship criteria, for example, it's got to be for a real big purpose. It can't be to just start up a business, because those funds are earmarked for retirement. That's what their sole purpose is for. However, because there are hardships and this is life, however, we need to focus. The spending of those funds could be for things like education, something that betters you, or an investment into a house, for example. So that's the responsibility of the clients, and it's going to take the financial advisor as well to make sure that they take the client through that process and understand the tax consequences and all of this. Because the reality at the end of the day is that while this is important for us to survive for the current time, if you haven't put anything into your fund, then by retirement you'll have run out. So if you take the analogy of a car, when it moves, it just doesn't generate petrol, it actually uses it. So you've got to put petrol in. So if you use the car and the petrol gets spent, it's going to run dry at some point. At some point, you're going to put it in. It doesn't magically appear. So that putting in that petrol is the income. So as long as the question of making sure that you have extra income, or you've secured yourself income, and so that you can make sure that you put that income, that petrol, into the car to take it to retirement, then we're going to have a problem. You're going to have a car by the time you're in retirement, but then you're not going to be able to drive further because you've run out of petrol. So whilst this is important for the sake of hardship, it is not the full solution, because retirement is still going to happen. So I hope you enjoyed the video, but yeah, I hope you really take the message to our clients so that there is no panic about what's going to be changing in terms of the pension fund rules. It is just to make sure that we get through the hardship and there's not going to be any other issues in terms of negativity in terms of the current status of their funds. Thank you.